The afternoon sun over Lady Pemberton's gardens lay soft as brushed gold upon clipped hedgerows and peony borders, yet Eleanor felt only the chill of 100 assessing glances. She stood beside a marble urn spilling ivy, her gloved fingers resting on the cool stone, while laughter and murmured gossip threaded through the air like distant wasps. Her lavender walking dress was impeccable, her posture flawless, but the ton had already judged her. She was, after all, Lady Ashford, wife of a viscount who no longer bothered to conceal his mistress. That mistress, Delia Crane, held court not 30 paces away. The widow wore jonquil silk, her auburn curls arranged in artful disarray, and she laughed with the confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. Eleanor's husband, George, Lord Ashford, stood at the edge of that circle, his expression a mixture of pride and weak defiance. He had not spoken to Eleanor since they arrived. A baroness leaned close to a companion. She simply stands there as if nothing is amiss. I should die of shame. Eleanor heard. She remained still. The sun-warmed stone beneath her hand anchored her. She had learned, in 5 years of marriage to a man who valued her dowry more than her person, that dignity was a fortress built from quiet endurance. She would not weep, not flee, not grant the gossips a scene. She inhaled the scent of cut grass and roses and lifted her chin a fraction. The trouble began with the click of heels. Delia Crane detached herself from her admirers and strolled toward the marble urn, a smile curving lips the color of crushed cherries. The hum of conversation dimmed. Ladies stilled their fans. Gentlemen turned to watch with the lurid anticipation of spectators at a bout. "Lady Ashford," Delia said, her voice pitched to carry. "How brave of you to attend. I do admire your fortitude. Or is it obstinacy? One can never quite tell with country-bred girls." Eleanor turned her head slowly, as if noticing an insect. "Mrs. Crane, the gardens are quite extensive. Surely you can find a corner that suits your purposes without encroaching on mine." A titter rippled through the nearest cluster. Delia's eyes narrowed. The smile remained fixed, but something venomous uncoiled behind it. "You imagine you have a corner left to claim. Lord Ashford has been most generous in describing your limitations. A wife who cannot hold a husband's interest is a sad creature indeed." "And a woman who covets another's husband is a common one," Eleanor replied, her tone as level as a frozen pond. "I am not sad, merely bored." Delia's color rose. The watching crowd drew a collective breath. Then Delia laughed, a brittle theatrical sound, and closed the distance. Her hand came up, swift and open-palmed, arcing toward Eleanor's cheek with the force of public vengeance. Eleanor did not flinch. She saw the blow coming, and something deep within her accepted it as the final note of a long humiliation. The sun seemed to pause in its passage. The slap never connected. A man's hand, gloved in dark leather, closed around Delia's wrist mid-swing. The grip was neither brutal nor theatrical. It was as immovable as iron wrapped in silk. Delia gasped. Her arm froze in that graceful arc, her body wrenched to a stop. The Duke of Foxmere released her wrist with a slight, deliberate motion, as if discarding soiled linen. He stood between the two women, tall in a coat of charcoal superfine, his dark hair brushed back from a face carved by cold aristocracy. His eyes, the gray of winter storms, passed over Delia without interest and settled on Eleanor. "An apology," he said. His voice was not loud, yet it carried to every corner of the garden. Delia's mouth worked. "Your Grace, You will apologize to Lady Ashford, publicly, now." The words fell like stones into still water. Lord Ashford started forward, his face blotched. "See here, Foxmere, a domestic matter hardly warrants." The Duke did not glance his way. "Your domestic arrangements are of no consequence. Striking a gentlewoman in a public assembly is actionable, unless you would prefer I summon the magistrate, Lord Ashford." Silence descended, dense and suffocating. Delia's bravado dissolved. She stammered an apology that was barely audible, then turned and walked stiff-legged toward the house, her admirers suddenly absorbed in other directions. Lord Ashford shot Eleanor a look of pure accusation before following. The garden party reassembled itself with frantic whispers. Eleanor stood as if rooted to the earth. The Duke had not moved. He studied her with an unreadable expression. "You did not duck," he observed, "or cry out. I do not grant scenes the satisfaction of my fear, your grace." Something flickered in those gray eyes, not warmth but the shadow of recognition. "I am acquainted with that strategy. It is exhausting." Eleanor's heart, which had remained steady through the entire encounter, gave a sudden lurch. She inclined her head, unable to find words. The Duke of Foxmere, a man whose estate spanned 3 counties and whose name was spoken in tones of wary respect, had intervened in her shame. He had seen her. Not the scorned wife, not the object of pity. Her. He offered his arm. "Walk with me. I suspect you wish to remove yourself from the gaze of these excellent people." She hesitated only a breath, then placed her fingertips on his sleeve. As they walked along the crushed shell path toward the ornamental lake, Eleanor felt the stares like arrows that could no longer reach her. The Duke said nothing further, but his silence was a shield. Behind them, the garden party buzzed with a scandal entirely transformed. And Eleanor, glancing at the stern profile of the man beside her, understood that something irrevocable had begun. The carriage ride back to Ashford House was a study in contained fury. George, Lord Ashford, sat opposite Eleanor, his jaw working as if chewing on bitter herbs. His cravat had wilted. His knee jogged in agitation. Eleanor regarded him with the remote patience one affords a child on the verge of a tantrum. "Do you comprehend what you have done?" he burst out as the carriage lurched over cobbles. "A public spectacle, a duke, no less, forced to intervene in a private matter. Delia is distraught. You humiliated her before the entire party." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "She attempted to strike me. I did not orchestrate the insult, nor did I summon the Duke." "You provoked her." "By existing in a space she considers hers." Ashford's face flushed the color of raw beef. "You will write to her. You will express regret for any misunderstanding and assure her that no resentment lingers. It is the only way to quiet this tempest." The carriage passed under the shadow of plane trees, dappling the interior with shifting light. Eleanor watched the pattern play over her husband's hands, soft hands, unmarked by labor or honor. She remembered the letter she had found that morning, tucked inside his desk drawer while searching for a missing receipt from the butcher. The handwriting had been Delia's. The words, unmistakable. "I will write no such letter," she said. "You will do as I instruct. I am your husband." A husband who plots with his mistress to declare his wife unfit and cast her out. Eleanor's voice remained quiet, even gentle. "I read the correspondence, George. The plan to claim I am hysterical, to present witnesses to manufactured outbursts. You intend to divorce me, and you require a scandal to do it." The color drained from Ashford's face, then surged back darker. His mouth opened and closed. The carriage swayed around a corner, and he had to brace himself against the squabs. "You went through my desk," he managed. "I sought an invoice. I found a betrayal. The distinction is narrow but significant." "That letter means nothing. Delia writes in hyperbole. You twist innocent words." Eleanor looked at him steadily. He could not hold her gaze. The carriage drew to a halt before the townhouse, and a footman stepped forward to open the door. Eleanor descended without assistance, leaving her husband to clamber out behind her, his authority crumbling like old plaster. That evening she dined alone in her room, a tray of cold meats and bread. The house felt hollow. She had married George Ashford at 19, believing his charm and his title a guarantee of security. The charm had lasted 6 months. The security had never existed. Now, at 24, she faced a future defined either by ruin or by a fight she was not certain she could win. A maid delivered a note on heavy cream paper sealed with dark wax. Eleanor recognized the seal, A fox's head, the crest of Foxmere. She broke it open with fingers that trembled only slightly. Lady Ashford, I trust this evening finds you in possession of your customary fortitude. I write to offer a word of caution. Your husband's financial dealings have extended into precarious territory. He owes substantial sums, and Mrs. Crane is not merely a romantic entanglement. She is a creditor in disguise, advancing him money against the expectation of a profitable union once you are removed. Guard yourself. If you require counsel, I am at your disposal. Foxmere. Eleanor read the letter twice, then folded it with care. A creditor in disguise. Delia had invested in George's debts, wagering on Eleanor's downfall. The cold calculation of it should have horrified her. Instead, she felt a strange, clarifying calm. She was surrounded by people who considered her a commodity. The Duke, at least, was honest about his interest, whatever that interest might be. She did not sleep. At dawn, she penned a brief reply. Your Grace, your warning is received with gratitude. I find myself in need of independent counsel. Might I call upon you at your convenience? Eleanor Ashford. She sealed it and gave it to a footman before she could reconsider. The step felt momentous. A bridge crossed over a chasm she had only begun to glimpse. The reply came within hours. Foxmere House at 4 o'clock. Tea would be served. As Eleanor dressed in a gown of sober gray silk, her lady's maid fussed over a missing button. Eleanor's mind, however, was already across Mayfair, wondering what manner of man watched over disgraced wives and seized wrists at garden parties. She was not naive enough to think him a knight-errant. The Duke had a reputation for cold pragmatism, for buying failing estates and turning them profitable without sentiment. She was another failing estate, perhaps. But at least he saw value where her husband saw only obstacle. She arrived at Foxmere House precisely at 4. The butler led her to a library lined with books and maps, where the Duke stood by a window, his back to the door. He turned as she entered, and Eleanor was struck again by the contained power in his frame, the way the light caught the silver threads at his temples. Lady Ashford, thank you for coming. I am in your debt, Your Grace. You saved me from a blow and then from blindness. Your letter revealed the depth of the plot against me. He gestured to a chair and she sat. He remained standing, one hand resting on a globe beside the desk. I dislike deceit when it is sloppily executed. Ashford and Mrs. Crane are amateurs. They will destroy you through carelessness if they do not succeed through malice. Then what do you propose? Eleanor asked. The Duke's gray eyes held hers. I propose an arrangement. My reasons are partly mercenary. Your husband's debts are secured against his estate, which I now largely own through purchased notes. If he divorces you and marries Mrs. Crane, she will strip the estate before I can collect. I prefer a different outcome. A marriage, Eleanor said, the word crisp and dry, to you. A partnership. You would become the Duchess of Foxmere, untouchable by scandal. I would consolidate my holdings and gain a wife of proven intelligence and nerve. He paused. I do not offer romance, Lady Ashford. I offer sanctuary. Eleanor rose. The proposition was not unexpected, yet it landed like a stone in her stomach. Another transaction. Another man who saw her as a piece on a board. I am no longer for sale, she said quietly, not even for sanctuary. She walked to the door, her heart pounding but her stride steady. The Duke did not call after her, but as her hand touched the latch she heard him speak. I understand. The offer remains should you reconsider. Eleanor left Foxmere House with her spine straight and her eyes dry. The morning papers were already circulating their poison. By nightfall, the scandal sheets would print a new morsel, a whispered tale of Lady Ashford's hysterical outburst, a suggestion of unnatural friendships, a veiled accusation designed to finish what the garden party had begun. She would face it alone. For now, that was enough. The scandal sheet, the London Tatler, appeared on breakfast tables across Mayfair the following morning. Eleanor read it over coffee in the shabby morning room of Ashford House, the paper held steady in her hands. It is whispered in the highest circles that a certain viscountess, lately the subject of a regrettable altercation at a fashionable garden party, has long been given to passions unbecoming her station. Sources intimate with the household speak of violent fits, unseemly correspondences, and a temperament so unruly that her lord husband can scarcely maintain order. The words blurred. Eleanor set the paper down with precise care. So it had begun. The manufactured outbursts just as the letter had described. Delia and George were moving quickly, planting their false witnesses, spinning their web. By the end of the week she would be branded a madwoman, a danger to propriety, a wife from whom no court would withhold a decree of divorce. She dressed in a walking gown of dark blue and went downstairs. Ashford was in his study, speaking in low tones with a man Eleanor did not recognize, a solicitor, by the look of his bag and papers. Both men fell silent as she appeared in the doorway. "I would speak with my husband," she said, "alone." The solicitor glanced at Ashford, then gathered his things and retreated. The door clicked shut. George Ashford leaned back in his chair, attempting a sneer that did not quite mask his unease. "Come to beg me to cease. It is too late. The wheels are in motion." Eleanor withdrew the letter from her reticule, the one in Delia's hand, with its damning phrases. She held it up, not dramatically, but as one might display a key. "This letter outlines your conspiracy. I shall place it before a magistrate unless you withdraw the falsehoods in the Tatler and grant me a legal separation on terms of my choosing." Ashford's face slackened. "You would not dare the scandal." "The scandal is already mine. I have nothing left to lose. You, on the other hand, would be exposed as a fraud and a scoundrel. Your creditors, the Duke of Foxmere chief among them, would have grounds to call in every debt immediately." His mouth twisted. "Foxmere, this is his doing. He wants you for himself. Do you imagine he is any better than I am? He collects broken things, Eleanor. You are a curiosity to him, nothing more." "Perhaps." She refolded the letter with steady fingers. "But I would rather be a curiosity to a man of honor than a wife to a man of none. You have until sunset to issue a retraction and agree to a separation. Otherwise, the letter becomes public." She left him sputtering, the study door a barrier she closed with profound relief. Her hands were shaking, but only she would know it. She had purchased a slender chance, and the price was the last of her illusions about the man she had married. She spent the afternoon in the small walled garden behind the house, seated on a stone bench amid lavender and bees. The sun shifted, warming her shoulders. She tried to pray, but the words scattered. Instead, she thought of the Duke's gray eyes and his unromantic proposal, a partnership. He had not offered love. There was a strange integrity in that absence. Footsteps on the gravel path made her look up. The Duke himself stood at the garden gate, his carriage visible on the mews beyond. He wore riding clothes, dark and dusted from the road. He must have come directly from the country. "Your butler said you were here. I took the liberty." He remained at the gate, not presuming entry. "I have news." "Then share it, your grace." She was too weary for ceremony. He stepped into the garden, the gate swinging shut behind him. "Ashford has petitioned a court for a divorce on grounds of wifely misconduct." He moved faster than anticipated. "Mrs. Crane has provided sworn statements from 3 servants attesting to your violent outbursts." Eleanor's breath caught. She had given Ashford until sunset. He had lied even to her face, using the hours to solidify his attack. "Then I am undone," she said, the words flat. "Not yet." The Duke came closer, though still a respectful distance. "The magistrate who will hear the case is a man I know, corruptible but also pragmatic. He values social stability above all else. If I were to intervene, if I were to present a counter-narrative that makes Ashford's plot look like the desperate act of a debtor, he would hesitate." "What counter-narrative?" "That I have been courting you, respectfully, quietly. That Ashford's accusations are the fabrications of a jealous man who has himself broken his marriage vows, that his mistress seeks to replace you because you stand in the way of her financial ambitions. The Duke's expression was unreadable, all of which is true in its fashion. Eleanor studied him, and in exchange for this rescue I would marry you. You would, but not as a piece of property. He paused, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something less guarded in his face. I made you an offer of cold convenience before. It was clumsy. I am not accustomed to appealing to hearts, Lady Ashford, because I have long believed mine incapable of anything beyond duty. Yet I find I do not wish to see you broken. I wish to see you free, even if that freedom is within the bounds of a contract. The bees hummed in the lavender. Eleanor's throat tightened. She had expected the world to end in fire and shouting. Instead, it was ending in a quiet garden with a man who spoke of freedom in the language of business. If I accept, she said slowly, there will be conditions. I will have control of my own funds. I will not be shut away in the country while you pursue pleasure in town, and I will not pretend affection I do not feel. Agreed. He offered his hand, not his arm this time, but his bare hand, glove removed. She looked at that hand, strong, capable, scarred across the knuckles from some old, unspoken violence. Then she placed her palm against his. His fingers closed, warm and steady. I accept your partnership, Your Grace. Alexander, he said. My name is Alexander. The scandal broke the next day with renewed force, but by then the wheels of a different machine were already turning. The Duke's solicitor visited the magistrate. A notice appeared in the evening papers, a terse announcement of an impending marriage between the Duke of Foxmere and Lady Eleanor Ashford, the separation from her current husband being amicably arranged. Society gasped, then scrambled to realign its allegiances. Eleanor watched from the window of Foxmere House, where Alexander had installed her under the protection of his household, and felt the first tentative stirrings of something she could not yet name. Society did not realign smoothly. It lurched and buckled. For every matron who suddenly recalled Lady Ashford's quiet elegance, there were three who proclaimed the engagement a sham, a cover for an illicit affair that had begun long before the garden party. Delia Crane, cornered but not defeated, whispered in drawing rooms that the Duke had been ensnared by a scheming wife, that Eleanor's supposed victimhood was a performance designed to entrap a wealthier man. Eleanor bore the whispers with the same stillness she had cultivated for years, but the strain began to show in the hollows beneath her eyes. Alexander insisted she accompany him to a musical evening at Lady Thornwood's townhouse, their first public appearance since the announcement. Let them see you unafraid, he said. Fear feeds gossip. Defiance starves it. She wore silver-gray silk, her hair dressed simply. On Alexander's arm, she entered the Thornwood ballroom as if stepping onto a stage. Conversations faltered. Fans fluttered. The hostess greeted them with careful warmth, acutely aware that a duke's favor outweighed any moral qualm. The string quartet played a Haydn adagio. Eleanor and Alexander moved through the room, exchanging nods with the brave and cool stares with the hostile. The evening might have passed without incident had Delia Crane not appeared in a gown of flame-colored satin, her arrival timed for maximum disruption. She curtsied to Lady Thornwood, then made a slow circuit of the room, pausing before Eleanor and the Duke. The hush that fell was immediate, predatory. Your Grace, Delia said, her smile painted on with precision. Lady Ashford, how very cozy you look. One might almost mistake you for a contented couple rather than a man burdened with damaged goods. Alexander's arm tensed under Eleanor's fingers. Before he could speak, Eleanor stepped forward. She was not tall, but the lift of her chin created an impression of height. Mrs. Crane, she said, her voice carrying the way a bell carries through still air. You have called me barren ground, a hysteric, a schemer, and now damaged goods. I have listened in silence each time. I shall do so no longer. And she slapped her. It was not a wild swing. It was a single, deliberate strike, the sound of it sharp as a pistol crack in the quiet room. Delia staggered back, hand flying to her cheek, her expression shattering into genuine shock. The red imprint of Eleanor's palm bloomed on her skin. "I am not your victim," Eleanor said. "I am not your rival. I am simply a woman who has stopped tolerating your cruelty. If you speak my name again, it will be in court, where I will present evidence of your conspiracy with my former husband, including your plan to poison him for his inheritance should the divorce fail." The lie about poison was a gambit, but it landed with devastating effect. Delia's face went gray. The room erupted in whispers. Several ladies gasped. Gentlemen looked stricken. Delia backed away, then turned and fled toward the door, her exit a rout. Eleanor stood motionless, her heart hammering. The room was a blur of faces. Then Alexander was beside her, not shielding her but standing with her. His expression was one she had never seen, not cold, not guarded, but lit with a fierce pride that made her breath catch. He bowed over her hand, a gesture of courtly reverence that spoke louder than any words. "Shall we take the air, my lady?" She nodded, and they walked together onto the terrace. The night was cool, scented with jasmine. Behind them, the ballroom began to buzz again, but the tenor had shifted. Eleanor had drawn blood, and the tongue, which fed on weakness, respected nothing so much as strength. "You slapped her," Alexander said when they were alone under the stars. "I did. I am not sorry." "Nor should you be." He turned to face her, his features half in shadow. "The thing you said about poison, was that true?" "I found a letter in Ashford's desk, among the others. Delia wrote of a sleeping draught she was supplying for his nerves. She hinted that stronger measures might be needed if he became uncooperative. I do not know if she meant murder, but it was enough to frighten her tonight." Alexander exhaled slowly. "You are formidable." "I am exhausted," she admitted, and the tremor in her voice surprised her. "I have been fighting alone for so long." "Not any longer." He took her hands in his. "Eleanor, when I offered partnership, I did not know what it would become. I am not a man given to softness, but I find myself altered. You have done that." She looked up at him, this stern, lonely duke who had caught a wrist and in doing so caught her as she fell. "I do not know if I can love again. The risk feels insurmountable." "Then do not love me, trust me. Let that be the foundation. Love, if it comes, will be a gift, not a demand." She nodded, her throat too tight for speech. They stood in silence as the music resumed inside, a waltz drifting through the open doors. And Eleanor allowed herself, for a single suspended moment, to imagine a future not built on endurance alone. The weeks that followed were a season of strange, fragile peace. Eleanor resided in the dower house of Foxmere's London estate, a gracious building of warm brick and tall windows, where she could receive callers under the Duke's explicit protection. The scandal sheets, after an initial frenzy, found fresher meat. Ashford, sunk in debt and deserted by Delia, retreated to a hunting box in Leicestershire, where he drank himself into irrelevance. Delia herself remained in London, but her power had waned. The mention of sleeping draughts and possible poison, whispered in confidence to a few influential hostesses, had rendered her untouchable. No doors opened to her. She was seen walking alone in Hyde Park, her gaze hollow. Eleanor felt a pang of something uncomfortably close to pity, then let it pass. Alexander called each afternoon. They walked the walled garden of the dower house, talking of politics and estate management, of books and childhood memories. He told her of his mother, who had died when he was 12, leaving him to a father whose grief had curdled into coldness. She spoke of her own girlhood in Dorset. Before marriage had seemed a bright adventure rather than a cage. Their conversations were measured, often punctuated by long silences that felt less like awkwardness and more like rest. One evening, a footman delivered a note sealed with a cheap wafer. Eleanor recognized Delia's spiked handwriting. The message was brief and venomous, a claim that she possessed letters proving Eleanor and the Duke had been lovers for months, letters she would publish unless Eleanor persuaded the Duke to forgive Ashford's debts. Eleanor showed the note to Alexander when he arrived. His face hardened. "She is bluffing. Such letters do not exist." "I know, but a bluff can still wound. The Tun will believe what it wishes." "Then we must remove her from the board entirely." He began to outline a plan involving solicitors and injunctions, but Eleanor shook her head. "Let me face her. I began this with a slap. Let me end it with words." She found Delia in rented rooms off Bruton Street, a sad decline from the fashionable apartments she had once occupied. The widow's face was gaunt, her beauty thinning into something angular and hungry. The room smelled of stale tea and desperation. Eleanor did not sit. She remained standing just inside the door, her bearing composed. "You threaten to publish false letters. I am here to tell you that if you do, I will publish true ones." Delia's laugh was a rasp. "You have nothing." "I have your correspondence with Lord Ashford, all of it, including the letter where you advise him on which apothecary to visit for a sleeping draught without troublesome questions. I also have a statement from that apothecary, obtained by the Duke's man, confirming you purchased laudanum in quantities inconsistent with personal use." Eleanor's voice was calm, almost gentle. "I do not wish to see you hang, Mrs. Crane. I wish to see you gone. Leave England. Resettle in France, in Italy, anywhere but here. Do that, and these letters remain private. Stay, and I will place them before a magistrate." Delia's defiance crumbled. She sagged into her chair, her face buried in her hands. A single sob escaped her. Eleanor waited, offering neither comfort nor triumph. When Delia lifted her head, her eyes were red but resigned. "You have won," she whispered. "I will go." "I have not won," Eleanor replied. "I have merely chosen not to lose on your terms." She walked out into the gray London afternoon and climbed into the waiting carriage. Alexander was inside, his expression querying. "It is done," she said. "She will leave." He took her hand. His grip was warm, solid. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." Eleanor managed a small smile. "I am a woman learning not to be afraid." That night, a commotion at the Dower House gate roused the household. Ashford, reeking of brandy, had arrived in a hired chaise, demanding to see his wife. Alexander intercepted him in the drive, his greatcoat thrown over his evening clothes. Eleanor watched from an upstairs window as the two men faced each other in the lantern light. "She is no longer your concern," Alexander said, his voice carrying clearly. "You will leave and you will not return." Ashford swayed, his face a ruin of former handsomeness. "You stole her. You stole everything." "You threw her away. I merely caught what you discarded." Alexander signaled to the footman. "See him off the property. If he resists, summon the watch." Ashford was half carried back to the chaise, cursing and weeping. Eleanor pressed her forehead to the cool glass of the window. She felt no triumph. She felt, instead, a deep and sorrowful relief, the closing of a door she had not realized she still held open. When Alexander came upstairs, he found her sitting in the darkened parlor. He knelt before her, uncharacteristically hesitant. "It is over," he said. "Yes." "Then why do you weep?" She touched her cheek, surprised to find it wet. "Because I am free, and freedom is heavier than I imagined." He did not offer platitudes. He simply stayed there on his knees, his hand covering hers until the tears stopped. In the quiet, Eleanor felt the last chains of her old life fall away. The wedding was set for the first week of September, at Foxmere's country seat in Surrey. Eleanor had requested simplicity, and Alexander had obliged. A small gathering of his closest associates and a handful of her own supporters, those few ladies who had refused to cut her in the darkest days. The chapel on the estate was ancient, its stones draped in ivy, its windows open to the scent of late summer roses. The night before the ceremony, Eleanor walked alone in the rose garden. The moon hung low, silvering the paths. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. Alexander emerged from the shadow of a yew hedge, his hair ruffled by the breeze. "I could not sleep," he said. "Nor I." They fell into step together. The garden was silent but for the rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. After a long moment, Alexander spoke. "I told you once that I did not offer romance. I believed it. I thought myself incapable of the sentiment, hardened by years of solitude and strategy. I was wrong." He paused, turning to face her. "Eleanor, I am falling in love with you. I have been falling for months, perhaps since the instant I caught that woman's wrist and saw you standing there unbowed. I do not expect you to return the feeling. I only wished you to know that what I offer now is not a contract. It is my heart, for whatever it may be worth." Eleanor's breath caught. The moon traced silver along his jaw, softened the stern lines of his face. She saw him then not as the Duke of Foxmere, a figure of power and reserve, but as a man who had been lonely for so long that he had forgotten the shape of hope. She reached up and touched his cheek. "I am afraid to say the words," she whispered. "My heart has been a locked room, but you have found the key. I do not know if I can call it love yet, but it is something deeper than trust. It is the beginning of everything." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. When he opened them again, the gray was bright with unshed emotion. "Then we shall learn together." The wedding day dawned clear and golden. Eleanor wore a gown of pale blue, a deliberate choice, not white, for she was no blushing debutante, but a color that spoke of serenity and new beginnings. The chapel was filled with candlelight and the fragrance of roses. A bishop officiated. Alexander's hand was steady as he slid the ring onto her finger, but Eleanor felt the slight tremor in his grip, the weight of the moment. When the vows were spoken, a ripple of applause broke the reverent hush. Eleanor turned to face the small congregation and saw faces she had not dared hope to see. Lady Thornwood, who had stood by her after the musical evening, a cousin from Dorset, the Duke's solicitor, beaming as if he had personally engineered the match. No Delia, no Ashford. The ghosts had been banished. The wedding breakfast was held on the lawn, tables draped in linen, a string quartet playing under the oaks. Midway through, a servant bent to murmur in Alexander's ear. His expression flickered, annoyance, then cold satisfaction. Mrs. Crane's carriage was stopped at the gate. She attempted to gain entry, claiming an invitation. The gatekeeper turned her away as instructed. He met Eleanor's eyes. "She is gone now, for good." Eleanor drew a breath and released it. "Then it truly is finished." Finished and beginning. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Around them, guests raised their glasses in toast. That evening, in the private apartments of Foxmere's great house, Alexander presented her with a small velvet box. Inside lay a gold locket, its surface engraved with a fox's head. She opened it to find a miniature portrait of a woman with dark hair and kind eyes. "My mother," Alexander said. "She was the only person who ever loved me without condition. I want you to have her image. It is my pledge that I will endeavor to love you as she did, without reservation, without demand." Eleanor's vision blurred. She clasped the locket around her neck, the gold warm against her skin. Then she stepped into his arms and kissed him, not a bride's chaste peck, but a kiss that spoke of hunger and hope and the slow, aching thaw of a frozen heart. His hands cradled her face. "Eleanor," he murmured against her lips. "Alexander," she answered. And for the first time the name felt like home. Autumn painted Foxmere in shades of amber and rust. The harvest had been bountiful, the tenant cottages repaired, the estate accounts balanced under Eleanor's meticulous oversight. She rose early each day, reviewed correspondence with the steward, visited the village school she had founded, and returned to the great house in time to walk with Alexander through the woods that bordered the park. He was a different man now. The cold reserve had thawed into something warmer, edged with dry humor. He laughed at her teasing, debated politics with animation, and no longer retreated to his study for hours of solitary brooding. The servants, initially wary of the new Duchess, had come to adore her quiet competence and her refusal to treat them as furniture. Foxmere, once a house of echoes, had become a home. One gray November morning, a letter arrived with a Leicestershire postmark. Eleanor read it at the breakfast table, her expression unreadable. Alexander looked up from his newspaper, alert. "What is it?" She passed him the letter. It was from a solicitor, informing the Duchess of Foxmere that her former husband, George, Viscount Ashford, had been found dead in a boarding house in Leicester. The cause was determined as failure of the heart, exacerbated by chronic intoxication. There were no mourners and no estate to speak of. Alexander set the letter aside. "Does this grieve you?" Eleanor considered. "It grieves me that a life so full of promise ended in such waste, but I mourned the man I thought I married years ago. The man who died in Leicester was a stranger." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we will not speak of him again." A second letter arrived a week later, forwarded from the London house. Delia Crane, now Mrs. Delia Marchand, had married a French merchant of middling fortune and settled in Lyon. She did not send her regards. The information came from a gossipy acquaintance. Eleanor filed it away with a sense of distant closure. The chapter was closed. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Alexander led her to the rose garden, now bare and dormant under a pewter sky. A stone bench had been installed beneath the old oak, carved with their initials and the date of their marriage. "You did this." Eleanor traced the letters with her gloved finger. "I have many hidden talents, among them stone carving. I learned as a boy when I was not permitted to play with other children. It proved useful at last." She turned to him, her eyes bright. "It is beautiful. You are beautiful." A duke is not supposed to be beautiful. Formidable, perhaps, terrifying, preferably. "You are those too, but to me you are beautiful." He kissed her then deeply, and the cold air seemed to warm around them. When they parted, he kept his forehead pressed to hers. "I must tell you something," he said. "I have loved you since the garden party at Pemberton. I watched you stand there, surrounded by enemies and gossips, your chin lifted, your voice steady. When I caught that woman's wrist, I was not acting from chivalry. I was acting from fury that anyone would dare raise a hand to you. I did not understand it then. I understand it now. It was love, fully formed, demanding to be acknowledged." Eleanor's throat ached. "Why did you never say?" "Because you needed a partner, not a suitor. Because you were still healing, and I would not burden you with my feelings until you were strong enough to choose freely." He cupped her face in his hands. "Do you choose me, Eleanor? Not as a refuge, not as a protector, but as a man you love?" She looked into his storm-gray eyes. This man who had been cold stone and was now warm fire, who had respected her freedom even when it cost him, who had rebuilt her dignity one careful gesture at a time. "I choose you," she said. "I love you, Alexander Foxmere. I think I have loved you since you stood between me and that blow and asked nothing in return. I was simply too afraid to name it." He pulled her into an embrace that lifted her slightly off her feet, his laugh a low rumble of pure joy. The sleeping garden seemed to stir around them, a promise of spring buried beneath the frost. In June, Foxmere hosted its first garden party under the new Duchess. The lawns were emerald velvet, the borders a riot of peonies and lupins. Guests wandered among hedges and follies, sipping champagne and exclaiming over the transformation of the once stern estate. Eleanor moved among them with grace, her laughter a silver thread in the warm air. She wore a gown of moss green, the fox-head locket gleaming at her throat. Alexander stood apart for a moment, watching her. A marchioness beside him remarked, "Your Duchess is quite the triumph, Foxmere. Who would have imagined it after all that unpleasantness?" He did not look away from Eleanor. "I imagined it. I simply had to wait for the rest of the world to catch up." Eleanor glanced across the lawn as if feeling his gaze. Their eyes met, and she smiled, a smile that held no shadow of the past, only the bright, unshakable certainty of the present. He raised his glass to her. She inclined her head, a queen acknowledging her consort. The garden party continued into the golden afternoon, laughter drifting over the roses, music threading through the oaks. And in the heart of Foxmere, where once there had been only silence and cold stone, there was now a duchess who had walked through fire and a duke who had learned to love without condition. Two people who had built a sanctuary not from walls, but from each other. Above them the sky stretched endless and blue, a canvas waiting for the next chapter. But for now this moment was enough. It was everything.